The world below was a canvas of screaming red and desperate brown. From the pristine silence of the Empyrean, the cacophony of earth was a faint but persistent stain on creation. God watched, and his gaze was not one of wrath, but of a profound, weary sorrow. Humanity, his cherished children, cowered in the deep shadows of a land they were meant to inherit. Behemoths of scale and sinew, leviathans of the deep forests, and things with too many teeth and too much hunger ruled the dawn and the dusk. The blood of men watered the roots of ancient, uncaring trees. It was in this silence that he summoned Sariel, an angel whose light was not the gentle glow of a healer, but the piercing, white-hot radiance of a star forged for battle. Sariel's wings were not soft feathers of comfort, but blades of condensed light, and his eyes held the cold, perfect fire of divine judgment. The balance is broken. The voice of God resonated not as a sound, but as a fundamental shift in the fabric of Sariel's being. My children are being erased from the world I gave them. They cannot fight what they do not understand. A vision flooded Sariel's consciousness, a huddled band of humans, their spears like twigs against the matted hide of a creature that was all tusks and rage. He saw a woman dragged into the undergrowth, her final cry a mere punctuation in the beast's triumphant roar. The earth drank her blood, and the beast drank her life. They need a protector, the mandate continued, searing itself into his essence. Not a shepherd to guide them, but a hunter to scourge the darkness. You will descend. You will become the apex predator they fear. You will be given a new form, a new nature, a vessel of divine wrath to walk among the beasts of the land. Sariel felt the plan unfold within him. It was to be remade. The flawless angelic form, which knew no hunger but for righteousness, would be twisted into a weapon that fed on the very life force of its prey. He would become a creature of the night, gifted with preternatural strength, senses to track fear itself, and a thirst that would be his engine and his eternal cross. He would be the first of a new order, a legion of hunters born of his blood, an army to carve out a kingdom for humanity from the throats of monsters. He looked upon the suffering world at the scarlet trails left in the snow, the gnawed bones bleaching in the sun. A grim purpose settled upon him. This was not a mission of mercy. It was a holy war, and he was to be its first and most terrible soldier. He accepted. The light of his form flickered, not in doubt, but in anticipation of the great dimming to come. As he turned from the divine presence to begin his descent, the first shiver of his impending transformation touched him. The celestial mandate was given. The stage was set for the birth of the first vampire. Sariel's fall was not a plummet but a terrible, deliberate extinguishing. He did not fall through space, but through states of being, his divine essence unraveling with every league he crossed between the Empyrean and the mortal clay. The blinding light that was his form began to gutter and dim, compressed by the oppressive weight of the atmosphere. It was a suffocation, a burial in the thick, resonant soup of primal life and death. Where his feet first touched the earth, a jagged mountainside, scoured by wind, the ground did not bloom with life, but sizzled and blackened. The last vestiges of celestial energy seared the rock, a final, fleeting echo of what he had been. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. The cosmic symphony of heaven was gone, replaced by the deafening rush of a river in a distant gorge, the sigh of the wind through pine needles, and the frantic, thunderous drum of his own new heart. He raised a hand before his face. The incandescent light was gone, replaced by pale, taut flesh. He felt the world not as a perfect, harmonious creation, but as a barrage of sensations. The cold bit him. The air carried the stink of damp earth, rotting leaves, and the coppery tang of blood from a recent kill miles away. His new senses were a weapon, and they were already unsheathed. Driven by the divine mandate burning in his soul, he moved. His form, once a concept of light, was now a physical instrument of terrifying speed and silence. He was a blur through the primordial forest, a ghost leaving no imprint on the moss. He followed the scent of blood and terror to a clearing, arriving just as the drama reached its crescendo. A great shaggy beast, all matted fur and tusks, had cornered a human family against a stone outcrop. The man was already down, his belly opened, his life pooling in the grass, dark and steaming. The woman stood before a small child, brandishing a stick, her defiance a fragile, pathetic shield against the monster's rumbling hunger. The beast lowered its head to feed on the fallen man. A command, cold and absolute, flared within Serial. Scourge the darkness. He moved. It was not a fight. It was an annihilation. He did not simply strike the beast. He dismantled it. His pale hands, which had once sculpted starlight, now became instruments of butchery. They plunged into matted fur and thick hide as if it were parchment. There was no art, only divine efficiency. A crack of bone, a spray of hot viscera, a gurgling roar cut short. The beast was not just killed, it was unmade, its massive form reduced to a ruin of gore in a matter of heartbeats. Serial stood over the quivering carcass, his pristine form now spattered in crimson. The blood was shockingly warm. It dripped from his fingers, his chin, and soaked into the dark fabric of his nascent, shadow-like raiment. The metallic scent filled his nostrils, overwhelming the smells of the forest, the fear, the death. It was a primal call, a siren song that resonated in the deep, hollow places of his new being. He turned his gaze from the slaughtered monster to the terrified survivors. The woman stared at him, her eyes wide, not with gratitude, but with a deeper, more fundamental horror. She did not see a savior. She saw a different kind of monster, one of impossible speed and chilling grace, standing in a slaughterhouse of its own making. Serial looked at his blood-soaked hands, then at the human woman, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He could hear it, a pulsing, vital drum that called to the new, gnawing emptiness inside him. The celestial mandate was clear. He was to be their hunter, their protector. But as the rich, intoxicating scent of human blood from the slain father filled the air, mingling with the beasts, a terrifying question ignited in the core of his soul. A question born not in heaven, but in the bloody mud of earth. Could a weapon, forged in blood, ever distinguish between the blood of the monster and the blood of the flock? The days bled into a moonlit hunt. Serial became a specter in the wilderness, a bringer of silent death to the beasts that plagued humanity. He moved with a grace that was terrifying, his form a pale slash in the darkness, his arrival heralded only by the final choked gurgle of his prey. He was the answered prayer the humans had not dared to utter, a god of the knife and the shadow. They began to leave offerings at the forest's edge. Rough-hewn tokens, woven garlands, their simple gratitude a balm he could not feel. For a new hunger was waking within him, a hollowing ache that the blood of monsters could not sat. The vital steaming life he spilled from the great wolves and scaled predators only sharpened the craving. It was a thin, foul wine compared to the rich, potent vintage he had scented on the mountain human blood. The memory of it, coppery and warm, haunted him, a phantom taste on a tongue that had never known want. The curse, his divine gift, was turning in on itself. It came to a head on a night choked with clouds. He found a village recently ravaged, not by beasts, but by men raiders from a rival tribe. The air was thick with the smells of smoke, spilled entrails, and the unmistakable, overwhelming scent of fresh human death. Bodies lay broken in the mud, their life essence seeping into the earth, creating a banquet of carnage. Among the dead, a single figure stirred. A raider, mortally wounded by a defending villager's final act of defiance, was dragging himself through the muck, leaving a slick, dark trail. His breath came in wet, ragged gasps, his heart fluttering a weak, frantic rhythm against his ribs. Serial stood over him. The man's eyes, glazed with pain, widened in sheer terror at the pale, impossibly beautiful and utterly alien face that looked down upon him. Here was no beast, but a man, a wicked one, but a man nonetheless. The celestial mandate screamed in Serial's mind, protect humanity. But a deeper, more primal voice, the voice of the curse, roared louder. It was the voice of the thirst. A tremor racked Serial's form. His vision sharpened until he could see the pulse in the man's neck, a delicate, throbbing blue line beneath the skin. The scent of his blood was an intoxicating perfume, drowning out all reason, all divine purpose. The hollow in his core became a yawning chasm, demanding to be filled. With a sound that was neither angelic nor human, a raw, desperate snarl, Serial descended. He did not use his hands to kill. He simply drank. The first taste was a cataclysm. It was not mere sustenance. It was fire and lightning, and life itself flooding his deadened senses. It was power, pure and undiluted. It was ecstasy. The man's struggles were feeble, his weak cries fading into a final, breathless sigh as Sariel drank. Not just his blood, but the very vestiges of his life, his soul. When it was over, Sariel recoiled, stumbling back from the desiccated husk. The body was pale, shrunken, every drop of vitality stolen. A profound warmth spread through Sariel's veins, a vitality he had never known, even in heaven. His senses expanded, the world becoming crystalline and sharp. He felt stronger, more real. Then the horror crashed down. He looked at his hands, clean of gore, yet feeling more stained than ever before. He had not slain a monster to protect the flock. He had devoured a man, wicked or not, to sat a damnable hunger. The thirst was quenched, but in its place festered a new, more profound curse, the knowledge of what he was, and the terrifying, exquisite pleasure he had found in the act. He was the hunter, and he had just discovered his preferred prey. The war within Sariel was now a silent, constant scream. The divine fire of his mandate clashed with the infernal warmth of the thirst. A battle fought in the quiet moments between heartbeats. He continued his crusade, painting the forests red with the blood of beasts, but his purpose had curdled. Each kill was a reminder of the power he now craved, the power that only one vintage could provide. He was a single blade against an endless horde, and the solitude was a breeding ground for his new, monstrous hunger. He needed an army, not of men with their fragile morals and fleeting lives, but of beings like him. Predators who could hunt the dark without flinching, who could wield the thirst as a weapon against the true monsters. The celestial mandate, twisted by his fall, provided the grim solution. He would forge a legion in his own image. He began to walk the edges of human suffering, a shadow seeking the perfect clay for his dark artistry. He did not seek the pure or the righteous. He sought the vengeful, the broken, the dying, those with nothing left to lose and a heart full of fury. He found them in the aftermath of beast attacks, in plague-ridden villages, on forgotten battlefields. The first was a warrior named Corbin, whose body had been shattered by a cave bear, left to die in a frozen ravine. Sariel found him clinging to life by a single fraying thread of hatred. There was no ceremony, only a grim necessity. Sariel opened his own wrist, and where angelic ichor should have flowed, there was only a dark, potent vita. He forced the blood between Corbin's cold lips. The transformation was a symphony of agony. Corbin's body arched, his bones cracking and resetting, his muscles writhing like snakes beneath his skin. He screamed as human life was scoured from him, replaced by something colder, harder, and infinitely more powerful. When it was over, he rose. His eyes, once dull with pain, now burned with the same cold fire as his maker's. The thirst was in him, immediate and ravenous. Sariel pointed a pale finger towards the woods where the cave bear slept. "Your first hunt," he whispered, his voice the rustle of dead leaves. Corbin moved with a speed that startled even himself. He found the beast and fell upon it, not as a hunter, but as a force of nature. He did not merely kill it, he bathed in its blood, drinking deeply, learning the taste of power, returned to Sariel, drenched and reborn, his loyalty forged in that shared bloody baptism. One by one, Sariel repeated the dark rite. A woman who had watched her family be devoured, given the strength to exact revenge. A soldier left for dead by his comrades, granted a new, eternal purpose. Each was a carefully chosen weapon, tempered in the fires of personal tragedy and quenched in the blood of their enemies. They were no longer human, they were his crimson legion. They called him the progenitor. By day, they hid from the sun that seemed to mock their fallen state. By night, they became a scourge, a coordinated pack of shadows that swept the ancient horrors from the land. Their methods were brutal, efficient, and absolute. They fought with the strength of angels and the hunger of devils, and the beasts of the land began to learn a new fear. But after every battle, as the legion gathered in the moonlight, a new ritual began. The bodies of the slain monsters lay around them, but the true hunger now turned its gaze elsewhere, towards the distant, flickering fires of human villages. The thirst Sariel had planted in his children was the same one that tormented him, a thirst that preferred a different, sweeter wine. The Legion was forged a perfect weapon against the darkness. But a weapon must be fed, and they were all beginning to crave the same forbidden feast. The Crimson Legion was a storm of fangs and shadow, sweeping the ancient terrors from the land. But a storm has no loyalty, only direction. Sariel, the progenitor, felt the restless hunger in his children growing, a pack instinct that threatened to turn inwards without a stronger will to bind it. He had forged weapons, but a weapon without a hilt cuts the hand that wields it. He needed a commander, a soul of iron who could channel their fury without being consumed by it. He found him on a field of glorious death. His name was Vladislav, a commander of a forgotten empire's northern legion. His century had made a final, defiant stand against a horde of scaled, bipedal creatures that had emerged from the misty fens. Now, he was the last. Surrounded by a rampart of his own dead men, he stood with a broken sword and a shield rent to splinters. His armor dented and stained, his body a tapestry of wounds, yet he did not yield. He snarled his defiance, a low bestial sound that promised a costly death to any creature that approached. Sariel watched from the tree line, captivated. Here was no broken soul seeking revenge, but an unyielding pillar of will, ready to be shattered rather than bow. This was the strength he needed. As the monsters closed in for the final kill, Sariel moved. He was not a blur, but a sudden, terrifying presence in the center of the circle. His arrival froze the beasts in their tracks. What followed was not a battle, but an exhibition of brutal artistry. He moved among them, and they came apart, limbs severed, heads torn from bodies, dark blood arcing through the air in a grisly rain. In moments the clearing was silent, save for the ragged breath of the dying commander. Vladislav stared, his mind refusing to reconcile the pale, beautiful being with the carnage it had wrought. He watched as Sariel, his own thirst stirred by the violence, knelt by one of the fallen monsters. The progenitor did not drink from the beast, but instead sliced his own palm with a sharp nail. He let a single dark drop of his blood fall onto the creature's fatal wound. The beast's body convulsed, its wounds knitting with unnatural speed. It began to rise, its eyes glowing with a new, malicious intelligence. But before the abomination could fully form, Sariel closed his hand around its head and crushed its skull to pulp. Life for a life, Sariel's voice was calm, devoid of pride or malice. Only a worthy vessel can contain the gift. The unworthy become that. He turned his gaze to Vladislav, extending his bloodied hand. Your men are gone. Your empire will forget you. But your strength need not be wasted. I offer you a new war, an eternal command. You will be the sword and the shield of a new order. You will be the general of my legion. Vladislav looked from the mangled remains of his loyal soldiers to the demigod standing before him. He saw not salvation, but a purpose, a war without end, a command without rival. The mortal in him was dead on this field. All that remained was the soldier. With a final, shuddering breath, he let his broken sword fall to the blood-soaked earth. He dropped to one knee, his head bowed not in submission, but in fealty. My life is yours, he rasped, his voice raw. My strength is yours. From this night until the last, I am your general. Sariel placed his bloodied hand upon Valerius's brow. The transformation was not one of agonizing rebirth, but of cold, deliberate forging. Valerius did not scream. He gritted his teeth, his body absorbing the dark power, his will tempering it into a tool. When he arose, his wounds were gone, replaced by a pallor that gleamed like marble in the moonlight. His eyes held the same cold fire, but behind them was the disciplined mind of a strategist. The Crimson Legion now had its general, and in the silent understanding between progenitor and general, an unspoken truth passed. Their war against the beasts was only the beginning. The true test of their strength would come when the last monster fell, and the Legion's boundless thirst turned towards the only prey left. Under the cold, strategic command of General Vladislav, the Crimson Legion ceased to be a pack and became a machine of exquisite slaughter. Where Sariel was a force of nature, Vladislav was a tactician. He studied the beasts, learned their migrations, their lairs, their weaknesses. He deployed the vampiric soldiers not as brawlers, but as a coordinated army, using the night itself as their cloak and the terror they inspired as their weapon. The age of monsters began to crumble. The legion moved like a scythe through the wheat fields of the primordial wilds. In the snow-capped mountains, they cornered the great, shaggy mammoth beasts, not with spears, but with sheer, terrifying strength, pulling the colossal creatures down into the red-stained snow. In the deep fungal forests, they cleansed the tangled groves of spider creatures the size of horses, their webs becoming shrouds for their own desiccated corpses. The swamps were drained of their scaled horrors. The rivers ran clear of serpents that could capsize boats. It was a golden age for humanity. Villages, once huddled behind spiked palisades, began to expand. Trade routes, long abandoned, were reopened. Fires burned brighter and laughter echoed more freely, all under the silent, watchful protection of the night. They left offerings for their pale guardians, goblets of wine, trinkets of silver, and sometimes, in secret, vials of their own blood, given willingly by a few zealous cults that had sprung up in worship of the Legion. But for the Legion itself, this golden age was painted in shades of gray and crimson. The thrill of the hunt was fading. The blood of beasts was becoming ash on their tongues, a bland sustenance that barely quieted the gnawing thirst. After every victory, they would stand amidst the carnage of their fallen foes, their enhanced senses acutely aware of the distant, pulsing warmth of human settlements. The scent of shepherds' fires carried the aroma of roasting meat. But it was the shepherd's own blood that called to them. Serial felt the shift most acutely. The divine purpose that had once burned so brightly was now a guttering candle. The mandate was nearly fulfilled. The beasts were being pushed back into the forgotten corners of the world, their numbers dwindling with every passing moon. And with the fading of his purpose, the thirst rose to take its place, a constant, whispering companion. He watched his children, his legion, growing restless. He saw the way their eyes lingered too long on the human villages they passed. He saw the way Vladislav, ever the pragmatist, would calculate the strength of a human stockade, not for its defense against monsters, but for its potential yield. The age of monsters was ending. But as the last of the great beasts fell to the legion's fangs, a chilling silence descended. It was a silence filled with a new, more dangerous question. The hunters had won their war. What does a perfect weapon do when there are no more enemies to kill? The answer hung in the cold night air, carried on the intoxicating, coppery scent of the very humanity they had sworn to protect. The thirst, no longer distracted by battle, now had a single, undeniable focus. A new kind of silence fell upon the world, a silence not of peace, but of anticipation. The great beasts were gone, their roaring defiance replaced by the whispering wind and the distant, confident sounds of human industry. For the Crimson Legion, this quiet was a torment. The thirst, once a battle cry, had become a constant, maddening hum in their veins. They were a sword with no scabbard, their edge growing restless and dangerous. It was in this fertile ground of discontent that the serpent found its voice. Not a beast of scale and fang, but a creature of cunning and shadow that had long watched the legion's rise. It was an ancient spirit of the deep woods, a whisperer of secrets that called itself Malachar. It had hidden from the Great Purge, seeing the angels in their get as a temporary scourge. Now, it saw an opportunity. Malachar did not approach Sariel, whose divine core still flickered with embers of purpose. It did not approach Vladislav, whose loyalty was forged of iron and blood. Instead, it slithered into the mind of Corbin, the first of the turned, whose bitterness had festered with every beast blood meal. It found him staring with naked hunger at a young woman drawing water from a village well, her throat pale and vulnerable in the moonlight. "Why do you starve?" The whisper was not a sound, but a thought that felt like Corbin's own. "You are the apex of creation. The strong prey upon the weak. 'Tis the first law of this world. You have slain the giants. Are you now to be shepherds to these bleeding lambs?" Corbin tried to shake the voice, to remember the progenitor's law, but the thirst agreed with the whisper. He fears his own nature, the serpent's voice coiled around his resolve. He clings to a ghost of a mandate from a god who has abandoned him here. But you are free. You are power incarnate. They are not your flock. They are your harvest. That night, a lone hunter from the village, a man named Ilian, failed to return. A search party found him at dawn, pale and lifeless in a thicket. There were no beast tracks, only two small, precise punctures on his neck, and not a single drop of blood left in his body. The village elders called it a strange plague, a final curse from the defeated monsters. But Sariel knew. He stood over the desiccated corpse, a cold fury building within him. The scent of Corbin was faint, but unmistakable. He had not just fed, he had gorged. When confronted, Corbin did not deny it. His eyes, once burning with cold fire, now smoldered with a defiant gluttony. "The war is over, progenitor," Corbin said, his voice thick with a new arrogance. "A new age begins. We are the masters of this world. It is time we stopped pretending to be its guardians." Sariel looked at his firstborn child, seeing the corrupting truth he had feared to face. The divine weapon he had forged was turning in his hand. The serpent's whisper had taken root, and he knew it would not stop with Corbin. It was a poison in the blood of his legion, and it spoke a truth he himself had tasted in the Raider's blood, a truth of intoxicating power. He had been sent to protect humanity from the monsters of the land. He had never considered that the final, most dangerous monster would be the one he himself had become, and the army he had bred. The serpent's whisper was not just in Corbin's ear. It was an echo in the hollows of his own soul. The execution of Corbin was a swift and silent affair. Sariel himself delivered the final blow, tearing the heart from his firstborn child as a grim lesson to the rest of the legion. The lesson failed. The act of discipline did not quell the thirst. It only proved their progenitor was capable of turning on his own. The serpent's whisper had become a chorus in the minds of the rank and file. And Corbin's fate was not a deterrent, but a martyrdom. The breaking point came not from a planned rebellion, but from a moment of primal weakness. A group of Sariel's children, patrolling near a large, prosperous village, caught the scent of a festival. The air was thick with the smells of roasted meat, spiced wine, and the vibrant, pulsing life of hundreds of unguarded humans gathered in celebration. The scent of their blood, warm and vital, was an intoxicating fog that smothered the last vestiges of their restraint. And the temptation, a physical ache in their jaws and a fire in their bellies, became unbearable. It began with a single vampire, then another, and then a dozen. They fell upon the celebration not as guardians, but as a squall of fangs and claws. There was no battle, only a harvest. One moment there was music and laughter. The next, there were screams cut short and the wet tearing sounds of feeding. Revelers were dragged into the shadows, their throats torn open. The town square, once a place of joy, became a charnel house. The cobblestones slick with a new kind of blood, not the foul ichor of beasts, but the rich. Red vintage they had all secretly craved. When Sariel and Vladislav arrived, drawn by the cacophony of terror, the scene was one of utter damnation. His legion, his divine instruments, were wallowing in the gore of those they were sworn to protect. Their faces were masks of ecstasy and blood, their eyes glowing with a feral light he had only ever seen in the beasts they hunted. A wave of human soldiers, armed with torches and spears, finally rallied. They saw not their saviors, but the true face of the nightmare that had been lurking in the shadows all along. They saw Sariel standing amidst the slaughter, and in their grief and rage they assumed he was its monster. A priest screamed, hurling a burning brand. "Betrayer, you have damned us all." The spear that followed was not thrown with skill, but with hatred. It was meant for Sariel, but Vladislav moved with blinding speed, intercepting it. The wooden shaft, tipped with crude iron, slammed into the general's shoulder. It was not a fatal wound, but the message was searingly clear. As Sariel looked from the bleeding Vladislav to the terrified, hate-filled faces of the humans, and then to his own children feasting on the dead, the last thread of his celestial purpose snapped. The mandate was ash. The flock had branded him the wolf. A cold, ancient fury, the fury of a fallen angel, scorned by the mortals he had sacrificed his grace to save, erupted within him. He had tried to be their shepherd. They had made him their hunter. Now, they would know him as their king. A roar of pure, undulated power tore from Sariel's throat, a sound that shook the very foundations of the village. His own children stopped their feasting and looked up, their fangs bared not in challenge but in awe. The betrayal of the flock was complete. The war for humanity's survival was over. The war for its subjugation had just begun. The last ember of Sariel's divinity died that night, extinguished not by God's wrath, but by humanity's ingratitude. The betrayal of the flock had severed the final tie. The angel was gone, and in his place stood a king of ashes and night, his heart a frozen citadel. The mandate to protect was now a decree to rule. What followed was not a war, but a conquest. The Crimson Legion, once a spectral defense force, became an open army of subjugation. Led by the cold, tactical genius of General Vladislav, they swept through the lands they had once saved. Human resistance was not just futile, it was a provocation. Villages that bowed and offered tribute a regular tithe of blood were allowed to exist in a state of fearful servitude. Those that raised a sword were made into examples, their populations culled, their streets painted red, their strongest warriors dragged into the darkness to be reborn as thralls or drained as a warning. Serial claimed the high mountainous fortress of the last great beast king as his own. It was a place of black stone and piercing winds, a throne of bones overlooking a subjugated world. He named it Ethelberg, the night citadel, and from its soaring spires, he cast a perpetual shadow across the land. The sun itself seemed to grow weaker, as if blighted by his reign. This was his kingdom, a realm of elegant terror. In the moonlit courts of Ethelberg, his vampire nobles held macabre festivities. While in the valleys below, humanity lived as livestock, their lives measured by the regularity of the tithe. The blood tax was collected in obsidian urns, delivered to the citadel by trembling priests of a new, forced religion that worshipped the progenitor as a dark god. Serial sat upon a throne of polished basalt, the still-beating hearts of rebellious chieftains encased in crystal pillars around him. He no longer fought, he presided. He drank the finest, most potent blood from golden chalices, the warmth of it, a poor substitute for the purpose he had lost. His kingdom was vast, silent, and perfectly ordered. The beasts were gone, the humans were broken, and his children were sated. Yet the victory was a hollow one. The thirst was a king he could never depose, a tyrant ruling from within. The adulation of his legion felt like the worship of jackals. In the profound silence of his absolute power, he could hear only the echoes of his own fall, the crackle of the celestial fire he had abandoned, the desperate prayers of the first humans he had saved, now silenced forever. He had built a kingdom to fill the void left by his shattered purpose, but the stone was cold, the throne was hard, and the blood on his tongue had long since lost its taste. He was the master of all he surveyed, a fallen angel reigning over a world of beautiful, eternal night. And he had never known a deeper damnation. The peace of the grave had settled over the land, and he was its restless, immortal sovereign. Centuries flowed like a river of blood, and the name Serial was forgotten, buried beneath the weight of his own legend. He was now the progenitor, the first, the emperor of the eternal night. His kingdom was a masterpiece of Gothic terror, a sprawling empire where humanity served in docile, blood-tithing herds, and his vampire descendants carved out their own petty domains under his absolute rule. Yet the throne in Ethelberg had become a cage of exquisite boredom. The thrill of conquest had long since faded. The taste of human blood, once a transgression of divine ecstasy, was now a bland sustenance. He had achieved everything, and in doing so found nothing but an eternity of emptiness. The celestial mandate was a ghost that no longer haunted him. It was a faded scroll and a forgotten tongue. His gaze turned inward, to the only creation that still held a spark of meaning, his legion, and more specifically, his general. Vladislav had been the perfect instrument, the steel to his fire. But even the strongest steel can grow brittle with age, or worse, develop ambitions of its own. Vladislav's loyalty was unwavering, but Serial saw in his general's eyes a reflection of his own restless hunger not for blood but for purpose. On a night when the moon was a sliver of bone, Serial summoned Vladislav to the highest peak of Ethelberg, where the winds howled like the forgotten souls of beasts. "This empire is a monument," Serial stated, his voice the whisper of shifting sands. "But monuments are for the dead. Our nature is eternal hunger, and a king who does not hunger is a king in name only." He looked at Vladislav, his pale hand gesturing over the sleeping, shadowed world below. "I forged you to be a general, but I now see a different design. You have been my right hand, my sword, and my shield. Now you shall be my legacy." A profound understanding passed between them, colder than the mountain air. Sariel was not abdicating, he was ascending. He would withdraw from the daily tyranny of rule, becoming a mythic figure, a sleeping god whose true name would be lost to time. He would become the question future ages would ask in whispers: who is the first vampire? Vladislav would become the face of their kind. He would be the one to rule, to conquer new lands, to wage the eternal bloody politics of the night. He would be the prince, the lord, the Dracula dragon. In him, the legacy of the fallen angel would be made manifest, not as a distant emperor, but as an active, terrifying king. "Let them fear you as they once feared me," Sariel said, his form already beginning to dissolve into the deeper shadows of the citadel, a retreat into a twilight of contemplation and power. "Let your name be the one that echoes through history. Let them tell tales of your cunning, your strength, your ruthlessness, be the nightmare they remember." Vladislav, now Dracula, stood alone on the peak. The weight of the legacy settled upon his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a crown of sharpest obsidian. Below him, the world slept, unaware that its ancient savior-tormentor had just passed the scepter. The first emperor had chosen to become a shadow, and from that shadow, a new, more famous monster would rise. The story of the angel was over. The legend of the vampire had truly begun.